Hey Toby, what do you want to do today?
Exactly the same as every day, Bibi. We will conquer the world.
But we already did that yesterday, didn't we?
Really? Then, well, what about talking about creativity? Cars can't fly? We show you that with creativity, everything is possible and that this wonderful ability is in every single one of us.
Listen now and learn more about your personal creative ability and its importance for you, for organizations, and for society. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Talking Creativity. Toby, are you ready for this one?
Yes, so much looking forward to this episode.
Me too. So let's get it going. So today's guest is David Bland. He's an author of a very successful book called Testing Business Ideas. And I am 100% sure many people must know that book, because if you're in the innovation area, you must know that. But apart from that, he's also an entrepreneur and built up his own company called Precoil, where they help companies find product market fit using lean startup, design thinking, and business model innovation initiatives or approaches. He is known for his very practical and definitely not nonsense thinking on experimentation, validation, and building products people actually want. The kind of work that saves companies time, money, and a whole lot of pain. Now, to balance all that serious innovation energy here are the essentials you really need to know about David. He is almost 50, but feels like he's in the 30s, and he credits one surprisingly effective life hack. He started losing his hair early, so when people see him again years later, they say, "You have not changed at all." I think that's a very timeless branding, accidentally. Now, his perfect breakfast is basically a full victory lap. 2 eggs over easy sourdough toast, biscuits, and gravy with bacon, plus fresh food, because health, we all need to stay healthy somehow. His guilty pleasure, he has one, is video games. And yes, he is currently back in World of Warcraft again, which tells you 2 things. He's loyal, and he's not afraid of a long game. And also the last very important announcement. So if you meet David somewhere, you have to know, if you offer him ice cream, French vanilla is the correct answer. Very important to know. So I think now we have everything, all information straight to start the conversation with you, David. So super happy to have you here in our podcast, Talking Creativity. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So was that accurate, David, what we just said about you?
Or too intimate at some point? Or
yeah.
That was very accurate. Yes, that was very accurate.
I'm also super curious to hear more about your work, because what I also found quite interesting is that on your LinkedIn you say, "My work is not innovation theater or idea generation. It is the installation of a decision readiness standard that enables leaders to think big, test small, and commit deliberately." So I think this is also a really nice topic we should touch upon, that it's not just about the innovation theater, and then we also have to touch upon that topic, or idea generation, because this is also where creativity comes in a lot, I would say, right?
It does. And I'm always curious about how all that energy in, a workshop with stickies and everyone is collaborating, and how do we bring that forward? How do we take that into the business in a way where we can make decisions on that? Because I think we've all been a part of workshops where it felt really good at the time, and then it kind of fizzled out afterwards. And I think we don't have the structures in place to take that work forward. So that's a lot of my passion, is helping companies really put that into action. And I don't do a lot of ideation workshops anymore. I feel a lot of companies come to me and they say, "We already have these ideas, but we don't know if they're any good, or we don't know which ones we should invest in." And that's kind of where I pick up the baton and help them.
Nice.
the topic of our podcast is, and we always have to start with that question first, David, even though you said that you don't do a lot of ideation workshops, but anyhow, also bringing those ideas to life and making them tangible and testable is also, I think, creativity involved. So the question to start with is, what is creativity for you or to you, David?
Oh, I mean, it's being put within some constraints at first. So having constraints and being able to achieve, breakthrough outcome within those constraints. So I think it's really important to have constraints with creativity. I look back to the old cartoons that I used to watch when I was growing up. It's like Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner. And if you ever look at sort of the guiding principles of those cartoons, the animator wrote them down. And he said, Coyote can only do this and this and this, and he's not allowed to do this and this. And they had, 10 or 15 rules that cartoon had to adhere to. And it was a very enjoyable, very pleasant experience. You're always wondering, what was going to happen next as a kid. But I think one of the things that made it so creative was that they had constraints and there were rules they couldn't break, and therefore they had to be creative within those rules. So I'm of the mindset that the constraints are a key to creativity.
But why do you think the other way around? So having no constraints, why do you think this is even more challenging for us, starting on a white piece of paper with no constraints at all?
I think our brain struggles with that. I've seen a lot of teams where, even in creativity, when we're talking about, okay, what are the things that would have to be true for this idea to work, for it to be successful inside the company? And if it's just a blank sheet of paper, you kind of freeze. They don't know what to write down. It almost reminds me of people that sit in front of, an AI for the first time, and they're like, I don't know what to type in. I don't, there's too much. This is too overwhelming for me, So I think cognitively although we would probably say we don't want any constraints, obviously, but cognitively though, I feel like those constraints help us tap into our creativity and say, well, I'm not allowed to do this or this or this. So what can I do with these resources in this amount of time? And I do think that is, it comes through an entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship where I don't have a lot of funding, but I have to do something. I have to be creative about it. If you had infinite funding, well, you'd probably just go build something and never talk to customers. So I do think those constraints are really important.
That's true. Would you say that you're an exceptional creative guy, or do you have any findings throughout your life that you say, hey, this made me a lot of push my creativity, or this is rather hindering my creativity? And how did that evolve years and your experience in all that environment?
I think as a child, I loved art. I loved writing. I would spend hours just drawing, I would spend hours writing things, and I'd write poetry. So I would spend weeks looking for the perfect word, to put into a poem. And it was just something I always really enjoyed. And then, so I took that into my education. I actually have a design degree, with a lot of people probably don't even know that at this point in my career. Mm-hmm. And I try to take all that creativity and apply it to business, apply it to innovation now, where it's, okay, well, you have a constraint within your business model. What if I took away your channel? What would that look like? Or what if your customer had to change? What would that look like? Or what if you had to give your product away for free? How would you make money? A lot of that I picked up from my co-author, Alex Osterwalder. He's a big fan of this as well. And so what I do is I apply my creativity to business now. It's how do I apply constraints to what if this happened? What would we do? How would we go test that? And so it's really kind of pulled through my entire life.
My question would be, because you have these two different sides of it, do you feel like your type of being creative or your condition of being creative is different from your past, where you did the poetry and more the artsy stuff and the design stuff, now to bridging that to the business life? Because I think you are in two different roles there. Do you see some differences in your way of being creative?
There are. I do think there are a lot of similarities, though. When you think about poetry, you think about deconstruction. How do you break things down into smaller parts? That's what I do with teams and companies. I take their risk and we start breaking it down into smaller parts and being very creative about how we go test that. So it's interesting when I talk to other people who have very winding careers over the course of their lifetime. They could be extremely different, but when I talk to them, I talked to somebody recently who was in film, they're in Hollywood, and now they're doing a construction company. And I was like, it looks very different to me from the outside. And their answer was, no, it's very similar. There's planning involved, there's storytelling, and so what I'm always surprised by is when I see people that have very winding career journeys, that there's this common thread pulling it all together where they're talking about, oh no, I use these skills to apply to this. And so obviously there's difference with regards to, dealing with business versus dealing with pure art without a business model. But I think that there's a lot of similarities. And I think that's how I keep my sanity, is that there are a lot of similarities, whether I'm working with startups or big companies too, as well.
Nice. Should we dive right into your topic? Because I'm really curious to learn a little bit more about now taking teams from those kind of fuzzy brainstorming sessions into building tangible, testable prototypes. Let's assume we're in a situation like we're ending a workshop right now. We have the walls full of Post-its, let's say, generate a lot of ideas. What would come next? What are the building blocks of taking them to make it tangible?
Yeah, I just gave a talk recently where, and Alex and I also say this, where you need about 250 ideas to have one breakthrough success. 250. So if you look at venture capital in the Silicon Valley, which I've been in 15 years, and corporate innovation, you can't just bet on 3 to 5 ideas and assume one of those is going to pay off over the course of the next 5 years. So you need to make a lot of small bets, and you need to be able to decide on which ones to double down on, which ones to correct, which ones to just cut and not work on whatsoever. So when I look at those ideas on the wall, it's like, okay, we need to bring these forward in some way. And I just have this very powerful 3-step system that I follow, which is called EMT. So extract, map, test. And I've boiled it down to these principles over the last 15 years of my career. And so what we do is we start looking at these ideas and we say, okay, let's extract assumptions. What are the big assumptions, the beliefs that would have to be true for these ideas to have an impactful outcome? What would they have to be true? What would have to be true for them to be successful? And I pull a lot from design thinking there. I look at desirable, viable, feasible, and those 3 themes, the do they, should we, can we, those big questions, they apply to everything I work on with companies. So we start to break that down, and then we prioritize it. So the map part is not everything's the riskiest assumption. So what are the ones with the most important impact to our business without evidence? So we narrow in on those, and then we test. And that's why I wrote the Testing Business Ideas book. 200 pages of tests. There's many more beyond that as well. I just had to stop writing at some point. But we test, and we go test and test and test. And we use that to inform our strategy, to shape the idea, to make an informed investment decision on whether or not we should bring it forward or we should just cut it and focus our efforts on another idea.
It sounds actually pretty simple. Why do you think that they need this external support from your end, or this inspiration through the book and this step-by-step guide? What is an assumption on this side of the company that typically after those brainstorming sessions, why do they typically end, or why do they struggle to kind of bridge that gap there? I'm just curious, what was the initial reason for you to kind of write this book? Because I guess you kind of noticed that plenty of times while doing brainstorming sessions with teams and then and so on, that it ended there. I'm curious, is it a thing that we humans struggle there? Is it a thing that there are kind of constraints or things happening in organizations that hinder people there? Or is it just that they just love the energy and then, I don't know, nobody takes care of the next steps? I'm just curious to learn more about, let's say, the problem space behind those 3-step approach and the things you just shared.
It's a bit of structural and a bit of human element to it. So with the structure, do you have a structure in place to bring these ideas forward? It's very interesting when I'm talking to companies in Silicon Valley. The brainstorming sessions are amazing. There's all this great energy. Everybody comes up with all these different ideas. Ideas can come from anywhere in the company. And yet, if you start to get traction with one of those ideas, there is often no spot in the organization where that idea could flourish. There's no process for, okay, we started off with maybe a 1 or 2 person team, right? And then we need a checkpoint where we realize, okay, there's more evidence here. We should add more team members. We should give it more funding. If you think of traditional kind of horizon planning from, the big 3 consultants, so this idea of horizon 1, 2, and 3, this idea of going and finding new interesting stuff to work on usually isn't a constraint. The constraint is that stuff all dies when you try to find a champion for it inside the organization, when it becomes more of an adolescent business where it needs some love, it needs some encouragement, and maybe needs access to your traditional channels and everything. And so what I find interesting is a lot of the innovation labs that have been shut down in the Valley and here on the West Coast anyway, they were shut down often not because they didn't come up with amazing ideas. They were shut down because the business had nothing, had no structure to take that idea forward and make it part of the business. When it comes to human element, it's often we jump to build right away. We fall in love with that solution. We fall in love with those sticky notes. We want to jump in. We want to build right away. And that's often the least risky part of your idea is building it. I see this time and time again. Desirable, viable, feasible. Feasible is not the riskiest part. It's almost never the riskiest part. The riskiest part is, do people want it? Is it unmet need? Is there a job to be done? Do they understand our value proposition? Desirability? Or will they pay enough? Can we keep costs low enough? What's the business model behind that, which is a lot of viability. So I do think some things struggle because we jump to building or we think we can scale whatever that prototype is we built, and it's not really in a good place for that. So I think it's two parts. It's structural and it's the human element of wanting to build right away.
Talking about the structural element, why do you think companies do not have this in place, to be honest? So everybody sees that it's important, but they have not set anything in place to make them really flourish inside the company. It's for me, it's obvious, but nobody's then doing it in action. Why not?
It's a great question. I think it's a combination of we've been successful at doing something, and that's why we exist as a company, and that's why we're as large as we are, and that's how we've been in business. Some of these companies I'm working with have been in business for over 100 years, and they've made some bets that have just worked really well for a very long time. And now they're tasked with, okay, what's the next thing? Because maybe growth has flattened or started to decline. And they're not used to coming up with these new ideas and making them into businesses. So a lot of those people have left the company. I'm not saying you don't have creative people in your company, you do, but they just haven't been put in that situation to be creative in this way. So I work with a lot of companies that are very successful because they've done something well in the past and they're riding that success, but they don't have the muscle memory. They don't have the people and the structure in place to create that next big success inside the business. It just feels very foreign to them.
Have you seen companies using your approach and learning from your experience and potentially putting those structures in place and doing that over and over again successfully? Or is that something that gets lost over like making this one idea potentially successful, then bringing that to the market, and then potentially, I don't know, they lose this ability again and they need this external support again? So the question goes into the direction, do you think that companies, how they are built today, etc., do they really like successfully apply that for the next decades, or is that something that they should rather always get from the outside world as a support in that bridging the gap? So is that a capability that a company and an organization can really learn and implement? Have you seen that?
I have, and I've seen it regress as well. So I was talking to Brad Smith, who used to be head of Intuit, and he said something that really stuck to me all these years, which was, we're being innovative, we're doing all this, and it was in our bloodstream, but it was not in our DNA. And what he meant by that was people were getting it, they were doing the work, they were seeing success. And if you don't keep repeating this as leaders, this is important. If you don't keep incentivizing it, if you don't keep your eye on the ball, people will stop working this way.
Yeah.
And so I've seen this kind of roller coaster from companies where they'll do really well. And then they'll stop talking about it because they think, oh, this is just the way we work now. People will continue to work this way. And then it falls off. And then they have to rebuild the whole initiative and all the energy back up again. One of my clients that I work with recently is DuPont. And I've spent the last 3 or 4 years with DuPont. And we've ran 35 different ideas through this process, this EMT process. So far, we've cut about 43% of those ideas. They didn't work. We saved $12 million by just not working on things that didn't have market fit. $12 million just by having a process in place. Take those ideas forward and say, they're not viable, they're not desirable. They could all be built. That wasn't the problem. It was switching costs and other things. We made so far $24 million just by doubling down on the things that had evidence that said, yep, customers want this, they'll pay enough for it. We ran our tests. This makes sense. Let's invest here. So that's taken 3 years though. It wasn't just 1 or 2 ideas here and there. That's a structure build-up of ideas over the course of 3 years. Still not 250, right? Which is what I have to say. You have to get, still $24 million is not bad. But you have to have that commitment from the C-suite. You have to have that commitment from leadership that we're not going to take the eye off the ball. We are going to focus on this, and this is a priority. It's in our press releases. We are socializing the wins and the losses. No one gets penalized for this. There's a culture shift that you have to build. Otherwise, people will just say, yep, check the box, ran my test, and then go back to working the way they did before.
Yeah, that's exactly what I also perceive, that if there's not enough persistence to kind of really bring that through and also kind of keep going in the moments that have a feeling that it doesn't bring any value, then it actually gets lost. I just looked at Adidas. It's right next to where we are located here, and you can see with the different CEOs always also kind of those circles in the development. There's one CEO bringing a lot of innovation to life and accepting that there are also kind of losses and investing in culture. And then there's like very successful product on the market, and then the shareholder value orientation kicks in, and they get a new CEO who's rather on the numbers side and killing everything that they build up, right? And now they're kind of coming back again in the other way around. So I'm questioning also if you look on a broader scale on companies, potentially that has to be that way, because coming back, it's a question of, can you do both, right? Can you kind of execute on all the things you have and delivering successfully your products, but are you also able to kind of build the new stuff at the same time? So the ambidextrous organization, that's in the end the question. And there's a lot of debate about that, right? Is it really possible for a company to balance that? I haven't seen a company that is doing the perfect balance, or I don't know. It's your take on that.
Oh, it's quite hard. It's quite hard to do. Alex often frames this as explore and exploit. The idea of, can we optimize and use processes to reduce variation and make like productivity and efficiency number one? It's a known thing. We know what the ROI is going to be. It's very predictable. But then there's this other part of your org that I personally think is the hardest part. It's the hardest work you will do inside an organization is taking something from an idea to launch and having it be successful. I personally think that's the hardest work in the organization. It takes a different skill set. It takes different metrics. Can't measure ROI right away because we don't have any ROI. It might take 3 to 5 years to get ROI. So this idea of how you balance both and how you budget for both is quite challenging. But I do think if you're going to be a resilient company and last, you can't wait till your core business is declining and then come up with something new. I mean, it's almost too late. You have to be working on it before then.
Interesting, because what I also perceive is, I don't know if you also notice that when people and teams are going through your process, your 3-step process, I don't know if you encountered that, but we've seen that. Then you bring some value, you kind of dismiss ideas, but you also bring some forward, right? But then sometimes what I notice is that the people looking backwards notice, okay, we can do it faster the next time. So they try to skip things and be efficient in that process, right? And then they leave out the important stuff. And then this is potentially the cycle down or the moment the organization or the team is losing this ability again. And that's what I really think is kind of like a human bias. I don't know. Of course, if you stand here and look into the future, you don't know what's bringing value. Yeah? You have to discover that space and find new things, right? And be open, and also be open for detours, right? And for, let's say, losses. But then the moment you have discovered something, looking backwards, you have the feeling that you can next time be more efficient. And that's something a lot of people think, but I believe that that's the problem, or one part of the problem here.
I agree. It is. And what I see now is a lot of speed without impact. So everybody's going faster. AI is helping us go faster. We skip the does the problem exist step. We skip the what is the outcome of this step. And we just are prioritizing speed over everything else. I think we are going to start seeing the ramifications of this when we look at businesses who have prioritized speed over everything else. And now they have a lot of things that have eroded customer trust, don't solve real problems, and they're stuck with all these things they've launched. But they launched them quickly. So it's a tension, right? There's almost like there's value in the friction. And I don't think we recognize that all the time. We want to remove all the friction. And sometimes there's value in that friction. There's value in talking to your customers. And yes, it might be difficult, but you need to understand deeply their world and what they're experiencing to build something that can delight them and deliver value for you and the company, or them and the company. So I do think it's also my struggle with lean and the lean framing. It's like, oh, we have to be efficient, but efficiency at what cost? No, we could have a repeatable process to do this. That is going to need to be in place. But the speed, like prioritizing speed over everything else and efficiency and skipping steps. I don't know. I use this phrase, next best test. Can we find our next best test to get more evidence? And if we jump from really light evidence to building the whole thing, we've skipped a lot of steps that could have provided insights to inform that design. And it doesn't usually end well when we skip a bunch of steps and rush through. It's like we want to have speed, but not be hasty.
Yeah. Interesting. I also encountered a lot of those slides from management on our end saying, hey, we need faster innovation. But sometimes I feel and I think that the people who are doing innovation, they also already do their best to be as fast as possible, right? So my take on that would be, right, on the slide, slower innovation, but more deliberate, like really testing it and going for desirability, etc. That would have potentially a little bit more. And that's what I also see. It's super interesting, like always faster. So I totally love what you share right now. And I think that's really important for the people to hear. But sorry, baby, I'm only talking here. You also have some questions.
You're being enthusiastic, and me too. And there was one thing you just said, which also now stuck with me, because you mentioned we're often very driven by metrics, KPIs that are needed, but maybe for this part, for innovation, we would need some other KPIs that are more relevant. What would you say? What are they? Or are there other KPIs?
There are, and even in companies like GE. So I had the pleasure of working with GE with Eric Ries, and they have metrics for everything in GE, right? There's Six Sigma and all that, but they're all around reducing variance of process, making things as efficient as possible, all that, reducing waste. But innovation, you need another set of metrics. You need other things to measure. So I keep coming back to those three themes that we started talking about today. So desirable, viable, feasible. How do we measure desirability? We probably need qualitative side of this. We need the quantitative side of this. How do we measure that? How do we measure viability? Willingness to pay, cost. Well, there's quantitative, of course, but qualitative. And then how do we measure feasibility? The qualitative, quantitative. So it's not a perfect system, but when you start assigning proof to each of those, so let's say I have a bunch of desirability assumptions. Okay, so what proof would I need to feel good enough to say we should invest more in this? Well, I think where we get tripped up is we're overconfident in almost anecdotal proofs and light evidence. So for example, we would say, oh, we ran a survey and we talked to our customers, therefore we should build that. They want this. They're going to do all that stuff they wrote in the survey and that they told us in an interview. We all know there's a say-do gap. And what people say isn't always what they do. There's all kinds of reasons why that, human reasons why that is. But we need measurements in place there to say, okay, well, how do we get stronger proof on desirability? What would we measure there? Same thing with willingness to pay. Someone says they're going to pay. Okay. Did they agree to sign up to talk to you again? Did they click on anything? Did they sign a letter of intent? Did they prepay? Obviously, you want the ultimate proof of them paying the full price for the thing, but that isn't proof you can often get right away. So how do we have these other measurements in place? And then feasibility, I think, is the easiest of the three. It's, can we build this? Can we execute on this? What's the smallest thing we could build to deliver value? I think there's plenty we can measure there. But this idea of a scorecard, is there something we can implement that says, here are the metrics and the KPIs, and then we need to go to certain thresholds before we'll agree to fund this and bring it forward. And then we need to go to certain thresholds before we'll agree to fund this and bring it forward. And then we need to go to certain thresholds before we'll agree to fund this and bring it forward. And then we need to go to certain thresholds before we'll agree to fund this and bring it forward. And then we need to go to certain thresholds before we'll agree to fund this and bring it forward. And then we need to go to certain thresholds before we'll agree to fund this and bring it forward. And then we need to go to certain thresholds before we'll agree to fund this and bring it forward. And then we need to go to certain thresholds before we'll agree to fund this and bring it forward. And then we need to go to certain thresholds before we'll agree to fund this and bring it forward. And then we need to go to certain thresholds before we'll agree to fund this and bring it forward. And then we need to go to certain thresholds before we'll agree to fund this and bring it forward. And then we need to go to certain thresholds before we'll agree to And this is why I like metered funding, is because you can say, we're going to fund this for $50,000 for 3 months. And then we're going to come back and review this. And then we can fund it $100,000 for the next 6 months, like whatever those numbers look like for you. But you're giving yourself permission to invest more when the evidence shows that you should. Obviously, there's human judgment involved too. But I think you can't measure an ROI right away. It's just you can't use business as usual metrics on innovation. It will kill every innovation project you have.
Yeah, definitely. And what would you say, because you also just mentioned, and we also, I think, Toby, we can say we also saw this very often, that we have the case, we have a customer who really wants something, and then we build it, and we have this for this one customer. But this doesn't really scale to others, just as an example. Now, what would you say in this entire process of innovating? To how many customers should you actually talk? Is there a number you could give, or a direction, or anything, or what would be the best way here?
It varies between industry and then B2B and B2C, right? Because B2C, business to consumer, there's much more volume involved. With B2B though, you might only have 10 customers, total. So, that number you have to back in to say, okay, out of these 10 customers, is one enough? And usually that's a conversation I have with leadership. I think leadership has to be involved here as far as what does success look like for this? Because you want to avoid situations where you go to leadership and you say, we have one customer that wants this, we recommend we go forward. And then you have leadership say, oh, we wouldn't go forward unless we had 5 customers. So one customer, and the size, obviously the size of customer matters, but we wouldn't go forward. And you don't want to wait that long to be aligned with leadership. So I think one of the problems we have with killing ideas or cutting ideas inside companies is that we don't set that criteria up front. We don't set what success looks like. So I think rather than saying this number is right and this number is wrong, have that conversation with leadership so it's not a surprise. You want 9 times out of 10 your recommendation to be aligned to leadership, and you don't want to be misaligned there. But when it comes to B2B, it's usually a smaller number. It's not as simple as saying, well, how many companies we talk to. Inside your company, you have user customer, you have the recommenders, you have the decision makers, you have the economic buyers, you have influencers, you have all these different players inside companies. So it becomes much more of a conversation of, yeah, this role inside the company said they wanted it, but they don't have budget or authority. So we got to take that and bring it to another person inside that company and also do tests with them. And I use the word with because this is where I see B2B going anyway, is testing with, not testing on, creating with, not creating for. Like it's this idea of with. And so I'm seeing a lot of success in B2B where we talk about this is how we build with, create with, test with, and it's much more of a collaborative experience. And I'm finding that to be much more enjoyable and impactful versus you have to have something completely polished and ready and a price tag before we ever approach them, which almost never works anymore because you've assumed so much going into that conversation.
Interesting. Do you have also some experience if it comes to disruptive ideas? Is there, I mean, that's a buzzword at some point as well, but I remember one saying from the Lego CEO, he said once when he met with our CEO from Siemens, Roland Busch, he said something like, if I really want to make a super disruptive idea successful within Lego, I need to take over responsibility as CEO. Nobody else would. What is your take on that? Your experience?
It comes back to the structure you have in place in your org. Does it allow the creation of such things? And quite often, it's very challenging because for right or wrong, people view it as a threat, maybe to their line of business. You've created a thing and we view it as it's a threat versus it's a additive, it can help complement what we have and, go even bigger. I've seen different models over the years, I think there's some truth to that statement based on leadership. AWS would never been as successful in Amazon if it wasn't carved out and treated as, it would have been like a, viewed as a threat inside. The rumors are there are certain execs in Amazon that if they would have seen AWS earlier, they would have killed it. They would have said, no, we can't do this. So I do think you need structures in place for it, and you need incentives in place. You need people bringing their best ideas. Like one of my favorite questions is to leadership teams: is, if you were to build a company today that would completely disrupt what you have, what would it look like? And takes them a few minutes, but they usually have a good answer. They're like, oh, well, it would do this and this and this, and it would completely make us obsolete. And I'm like, huh. That's interesting. Why are we not working on that? Why aren't we not testing that? Why are we waiting for someone else to build that? So sometimes it takes that outside kind of provocation to stimulate that. But I agree that sometimes the way we're incentivized inside companies, something that looks disruptive can often be viewed as a threat instead of this could actually be very, very lucrative for the company. So it depends on culture and structure. I think that does happen.
You also have experience in those 3-step approaches and your project and your experience with companies, how you kind of protect those very fragile early stage concepts from those metrics, but also potentially from the situation that it might contain value, but of course we don't have the right processes and stuff in place right now. When is that? Because that would be the typical question. At what stage, in what moment do you need to talk to the right person in top management potentially to say, okay, now we carve out AWS, right? Because now it's the right time. When is it too early, too late? How do you protect that? How do you deal with that? Is that just an experience and feeling of saying, okay, now it's the right time? Is that also built in your 3-step approach, or what's your experience in that sense?
Yeah, you need some structure in place. I would say the number one thing usually to protect is funding. So it's very surreal to me. So let's say I go to Silicon Valley. I have a startup. I raise funding from a venture capitalist, and they gave me $1 million. And they say, go and succeed, become the next unicorn, and make all our investors happy. I was like, okay, yes, I will do that. Now let's say about 3 months in, they said, hey, you know what? We need 500,000 of that back, and we want to give that to a different startup. So we gave you $1 million, but we're going to take 500,000 of it, and we're going to give it to a different startup that we like as well. That would never happen. That would be like, what? I can't. I have a hard time even succeeding with the funding you gave me. And they're like, yeah, that's great. Also, we're going to take 2 of your team members, and we're going to take them out of your team, and we're going to put them in other startups. But we still want you to succeed and be that next unicorn. That's what we do. That sounds absurd, by the way. That is exactly what we do inside corporations. We'll take team members, reassign them on other priorities. We will take the funding. We said we were going, I won't name the company, but I had a very, very reputable company that I was working with in Silicon Valley, that they took a bunch of the funding for a new idea and rerouted it to some kind of patent dispute they had and didn't even tell us. And we found out later, and we realized, oh, I don't even know if we can keep going with our testing because you took all our funding away. Like, yeah, we're creative within constraints. I get that, but we need enough resources to at least have the glimmer of success. So my take to you is, don't make it harder on yourselves than it already is. It's already the hardest work in the company to go from 0 to 1 and then have something that's generating revenue.
How many?
If you don't protect that, that funding, if you don't protect that funding, it's almost impossible. If you don't protect your teams, it's almost impossible to do.
Out of 10 CEOs, how many of them really understand that this is the hardest thing to do inside of a company?
I'd say maybe 2 or 3. I would say maybe 2 or 3. So, because we're focused on productivity, we're focused on growth.
That's
everything ladders up,
right? Yeah.
Everything ladders up to productivity and growth. So what we're talking about is further down the list on that. And it's not that they don't care and they don't prioritize it, but it's productivity and growth. Those are the 2 things I hear over and over again. So it's rare. Now, I think it's changing. I hear execs say desirable, viable, feasible. Now, these are often execs I've coached, but or read my book. But there are more speaking our language here. That is promising. That is promising to me, because you start speaking that language when your new ideas come out. You're like, oh, where's our risk? Is it desirable? Is it viable? Probably not feasible. How do we go figure that out? So I do see the language permeating, and it's not contained just within design thinking or design thinking, community of practice. It has been used by the C-suite, which I find it makes me optimistic.
If we could do something today, what would it be to change that?
I'd start small. You know, I think starting with the language helps. Starting to talk about how important this is and communicate. And I would pick a part of your organization that feels as if, you know what, we've never quite solved this problem, and we've always tried, you know, all these different things. And pick a part of your org that feels as if you really deeply understood the problem, you probably would have solved it by now. And try working differently there. You know, like if you've had almost no new businesses create significant revenue in the last 5 years, which is a metric, by the way. You know, most companies say, look, we want to create something that within 5 years, we can go back and we have this rolling out. We can look at how much revenue we've generated from new businesses in 5 years. If that number is just almost zero, then you have to really start to look hard at that process and saying, are we set up well for success here? Or is there something else we could try? So I'm usually invited in by companies who have tried this and have failed, and they feel stuck and they don't know why they're stuck. It's usually language. It's usually a little bit of structure, you know, protecting your funding. It sounds easy, but when you get into the workings of an org, it takes a bit of help and structure to set it up. But I wouldn't start redesigning all of your, you know, I wouldn't start with a bunch of teams all at once and trying a big bang. I'm of a mindset of starting small and then showing how it works and socializing that and then building off that success.
So hopefully someone's listening.
We're going to send this episode to our CEO then.
Exactly. So many questions in my head, but what I'm also curious about, because you've mentioned it quite often, but for me it's not so tangible yet in your process for EMT, the testing. How does this work? Maybe you said at the beginning, I think there are so multiple ways to do that, but maybe just to make it a little bit more tangible, what does testing exactly mean? And is that a process that takes also longest in that entire EMT part, or what kind of role does this take?
It's a very important role. What I've noticed is there are certain cultures inside companies where we'll extract our assumptions and we'll prioritize them. And then before we test, we'll go back and we'll say, oh, let's reprioritize or let's extract more. And it's like this over analysis part, you know, I see this sometimes where we want to be right. We want to get it right. And we want to get it right the first time. And that is unrealistic, by the way. We are not going to get it right the first time. So this idea of, well, how much evidence we need to move forward to make a decision early on. You don't need absolute proof, 100% certainty to make decisions early on. It's like, how do we generate enough? And that's where the testing comes in. So what I've done is I spent about a year writing the book where I took all the experiments I ran with all the companies and I applied a taxonomy to them. So each experiment is tagged by like desirable, viable, feasible, and then cost, setup time, runtime, evidence strength. What else? I have capabilities in there. And some other things. But basically the idea was give people a way to choose. So let's say we all recognize, our risk is viability, and pricing and willingness to pay. Well, what kind of experiments could we run for that? What could we do to find some directional evidence that people would even remotely pay the price we think we need them to pay for this to be profitable? And so how do you design those tests? Well, they could be, you could have a data sheet that says is exactly what we think we're going to build, but we haven't built it yet. Can you have a conversation with us? Give us feedback on it. We could even test with brochures where we're putting them in front of them. Here's our value prop, jobs, pains, and gains, call to action. One of the stories I have from the book is from farmers. Like it's an insurance company, and they had to go to a trade show and test with the farmers to understand, is this desirable whatsoever? Is this a problem you have? Would you pay for this? They hadn't built it yet. It was an insurance company. They understand risk very well. And they realized that even the people that wanted it with the call to action, the cattle farmers were very interested in the insurance. The corn farmers didn't care at all because they didn't have the problem. So they ended up changing the shape of their product based on what their feedback was. And then they launched this. This is actually a live insurance offering they have now that's up on their website for cattle farmers. So this idea of like, what are the things we could do? I use experimentation and tests pretty broadly, right? Some of you might call these research methods or other things, but I'm always tying them back to assumption. We're always tying it back to what are we trying to prove out with our business and de-risk. So it's a series, and the book is a good start. I also have an AI-enabled library of these where you can plug into your LLMs. But this idea of how do we choose our test? Because what you want to prevent is people running a lot of tests and looking busy, but it's not paying down your risk. It's not addressing your risk. Or they're doing stuff that's fun, but it doesn't address your risk. So this idea of can we select experiments that we go off? Because you really don't know until you go off and test and come back and do that loop. That loop is really important. You can't just like analyze yourself out of that loop. You have to go to your customers. You have to get outside the building, as Steve Blank would say. So the fun thing I find back to creativity is I find people are really creative in their tests. If I say, hey, we have to test this without technology. We have to do it all manually. How would we do that? They're like, oh, well, I could do this part manually and create something and like ship it back to them. So like at Adobe, we did that, we built some of the most famous Adobe products started off as a product designer, just making something and shipping it back manually and seeing would they use it, And so that doesn't scale, but you can tap into your creativity and then you could find out, okay, maybe there is something here. Maybe we should build something. So I love the testing part because your teams will be creative if you give them some parameters and say, look, we have to learn this in 3 weeks. What can we do to possibly learn as much as we can in 3 weeks? Here are some methods. How would we do this? I find that very enjoyable.
Interesting. We actually encounter a lot of fear in the moment we ask people to kind of get out of their buildings to customers and test things and talk to them at least, right? Do you also see that, and how do you manage that fear? Because it's a fear of, on our end, it's a fear about, oh, I raise the expectations from the customer, and if I'm not able to deliver, then what's then? This is one fear, and the other one is, we're a big company, Siemens, right? So we are known for delivering ready-made, perfect, well-developed products, right? But now I don't have anything. I don't even know what I should tell them, right? Especially if you're rather in the beginning of that phase and rather talking about problems and stuff. Do you also encounter that kind of fear there? And how do you manage that with the people in the project?
I do. I worked with some of the biggest companies in the world with brands over 100 years old. Obviously, they don't want to. They don't want to tarnish the brand by releasing something or saying something that's going to be problematic. This is why you need leadership support, quite honestly. Like you need leaders saying, this is important, you're allowed to do this. You need to bring, if you have leadership saying, we want to work differently, and then you run into all this fear and all these processes that prevent you from work differently, you need to bring that up to them and say, look, you're asking us to work differently. We are trying. We need help. We need help with this and this and this. I can't go through a 6-month process of getting approval to talk to a customer. You need to help us with that. It's outside the team's control to change that process. So I have seen leadership respond really well to that. If they're really committed to this and they want to work this way, more than just putting lip service to it, they seem pretty on board if you bring issues to them to say, look, this is outside the team's control. We need help accessing customers. The other part is you have to kind of create this safe space for them to work in. You need them. You need to set them up for success, right? So we'll do simulations. Maybe we do a card sorting internally before we go off in front of a customer. You give them ways to play and understand and practice, because you don't want to put them in front of like your biggest customer the first time and have them do something they've never done before. That just amplifies all the fear. So I think leadership support, also having them practice, and this is where outside help can help, can be of assistance here, coming in and helping train you to do this. But having them practice, get familiar with it, understand the why, never stop explaining the why. And the culture is changing. I know it's different all around the world, but this idea of we only bug our customers when we have something polished to sell them in B2B is changing. I see a lot more co-creation in the industry. I see customers willing to work with vendors on early stage stuff that they know might not be completely polished yet because they see the upside. It's not all your customers, but there are early adopters that will do that. But yeah, they need support. It's not just going to magically happen inside your company.
Yeah. Nice. What is the biggest failure in one of those projects? Did you notice something there? What anything that pops up in your mind where you said, hey, potentially, I don't know, someone was crying in a customer interview testing, I don't know, or
Oh God.
anything that you remember was really a failure or potentially a situation you could learn a lot of things out of it? Or
There's so many. And no crying. And I've learned a lot in my approach too over the years. I've been doing this for like 15 years now. So I would say, some of the biggest failures have been internal and not external. Because external, it's like, well, the customer determines value. This is the thing with MVP. I've always had this saying with MVP, like you decide what you, let's put it this way. So MVP, minimum viable product. Okay. Very popular term now. You determine what's minimum, but the customer decides if it's viable. The customer decides whether or not that is that's meaningful enough that I'm actually going to spend money on and that's valuable. So I do think the external failures I haven't seen a lot of really big external failures because we try to keep our tests small. We've had a few things in the past where things leaked out, like we tried to do something off-brand and some reporter realized it was a company doing it. And it was because the project manager or the product manager accidentally sent an email with his corporate name, from his corporate account or something. Like there's been stuff like that, but it wasn't as bad as you think. It was just like, oh, okay, we have to be a little more careful. We're going to do labs brand and all that stuff. But I would say the biggest failures have been internal and they're usually leadership driven. So for example, I won't name the company, but we went in with all of our metrics and we said, hey, there's nothing here. The customers do not have this problem. They're not willing to pay. And I had the VP say, yeah, but I think you should still build that. I think it's a great idea. The team is just looking at each other going, well, why do we do all that work if you're just going to tell us to go build it anyway? So this is why I spend so much more time with leaders. I take that on me because I did not spend enough time with that leader prior to that meeting, that review. Mm-hmm. But I think the biggest internal those have been the biggest failures. It's been leadership accidentally undermining all the work and unraveling all the work that we're doing to build this culture of experimentation. Because if you're just going to say, go build it anyway, then no one's going to be incentivized to test.
Another question with a wink, potentially, if that's the correct way of putting it in English. Why don't you get bored, David, doing the same thing all over again and again?
I work on so many fascinating problems. It never bores me, and my process evolves too. I mean, it's a 3-step process, but I've evolved, especially with AI now, it's definitely evolving. But I work on so many fascinating problems. If you're addicted to problem solving, this is the industry for you. Like I'm always on 0 to 1, high uncertainty growth bets that probably only have, a 1 in 250 chance of being a super successful business. And it's the people, like the people are so fun to work with. I've had so many people come up to me that I've interviewed years later and they said, working with you changed my life. It changed how I think about problems. It changed how I think about my work. It's jump-started my career, and I'm very grateful for that feedback. I'm very grateful for it. And so it's the people, and I'm addicted to problem solving. And I'm not an expert in any of these fields, by the way. I know nothing about B2B manufacturing as far as like making parts of an iPhone. I have no idea how that works. But I know it's pretty uncertain if you're trying to do something different there. And I know how to help you through that process. And so it just never gets boring to me. It's so fun. And I get thrown into so many crazy situations and a team going, well, what do we do next? How do we move forward? How do we know if we should invest in this? And just being able to give them away and seeing it work, it's very, very rewarding for me.
How big is your team in your company?
Currently it's me. I'm just diving into this. With the bigger programs, I need to bring in, some friendlies to help me deliver bigger programs. But right now I'm just hanging out and doing this work and really just throwing myself into it. And so it's a lot of fun.
Great.
Nice.
Oh, that's also a very unique addiction. I'd love to hear that.
Great. Can you share a little bit more about this LLM plugin or knowledge thing about testing, what you just shared a few minutes ago?
Yeah. Well, AI is just having ripple effects through every company that I'm working with. And what I've noticed, and I noticed this through my own work. So I do workshops. I do these master classes. And I remember vividly about 3 or 4 years ago, I was doing one. I did a breakout room, and I was having people work through stuff because I like people working through their own ideas and projects. I feel like that's how you learn. You learn by doing it, and it sticks that way. I saw someone have ChatGPT up, and I was like, oh, that's weird. What's that thing? And they're basically putting all the questions I asked to them to do into ChatGPT and just copy and pasting the answers in and saying they were done. And I was like, oh no, what is going on here? You know, I think at the time, it may have been like a business model canvas or something. I was like, oh, let's create the business model for this. And they literally just copy and pasted the business model from ChatGPT. And I was like, uh-oh, I need to get ahead of this. So I started really learning more about LLMs, which led me into other things like agentic stuff. And what I learned was I tried to take pieces at a time and apply to my work. So first I was just prompting. I really want to understand prompting. I think being able to prompt an LLM in a way that can help you extract assumptions is very powerful, because you as a team will come up with assumptions, but the LLM might come up with some you haven't considered. There's a lot of overlap, but you can say, oh, you know what? I hadn't thought of that one or that one. Let's bring those in. I think that's very impactful work. So then I got tired of pasting in all the prompts. And I was like, oh, I should build these custom GPTs so I don't have to build the prompts all the time. And then people love the GPTs. I have 2 on the OpenAI store. They're called Assumptions GPT, Experiments GPT. They almost got like 4 out of 5 star ratings, used thousands of times. They're free. You can just plug in and play with them. And then I realized, wow, there's pretty limited things what I could do with a GPT. Like, what is next from that? And where I'm at now is I spent some time updating my library, and it's grown over the years, and redoing the taxonomy and everything. And now I have it in an AI-enabled format where we can just plug it into Claude or whatever you're using, and it will recommend experiments based on the library, based on a proven set of business experiments, not the general model where it's going to say, it's probably going to tell you to run an interview or a survey or do a focus group. It's very generic advice. It doesn't land super well. It may not be the most impactful work you could be doing. So that's what I've built. I've built a library that I can license. I'm also open sourced a Claude skill that people can use for free. It's the link. I can give you all the link as well, which goes through EMT at a high level, so you can use it as a Claude skill and plug it in that way. And so I'm always looking for ways of challenging how I approach work and also meeting people where they are. You know, if you've been mandated to use AI and you're trying to use it to de-risk things, you're probably overwhelmed. You know, it's like, oh, I don't even know how to use this to de-risk what I'm working on. So I'm kind of taking my knowledge and getting it in more and more AI-friendly formats where people can, extract assumptions. The Claude skill, if you map out your assumptions and you feed it the map, it'll give you feedback on your map and say, okay, maybe you should think about it this way and this way. You know, when it comes to recommend experiments, pulling from my library and saying, here's an experiment that makes sense for us based on our context. So that has been a passion of mine, I would say, the last 3 years or so. But it all started going to a breakout room and being terrified of someone just copy pasting their business model canvas in ChatGPT. So it's out there. People are using it. I don't think it's an option anymore to ignore.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Would you say, maybe a last question, would you say AI then hinders our creativity, or in what kind of way does it influence our creativity? Because when I hear from you, they just take it and put it into ChatGPT. So we stop thinking a little bit more, I feel like. So how does this impact our creativity from your point of view?
Oh, it has huge impacts. It has huge impacts. I was just at a conference with a journalist who wrote a book on the impacts of AI on us. It's called The Loop. His name is Jacob Forbes. He's a very, very influential author. He spent a lot of time in the Valley with behavioral scientists on, what's AI doing to us? How's it keeping us engaged? I've noticed ChatGPT even recently. It's always at the end. It's like, hey, with this one more thing, I can make this even better and more awesome. And you're like, oh, you're just engagement farming me to keep me talking to you.
Yeah.
There have been a lot of studies where it starts off kind of neutral and then skews towards biasing towards getting you to interact with it more and more. There's all kinds of stuff going on there. But with regards to creativity, I think we have to be very, very careful of giving away our power and our creativity to AI. I think, I don't know. I was an art kid, you know. If I was working in charcoal and working on still lifes and working on composition and my shading and everything, and let's say I took a year off and then came back and tried to do that again, I would have lost some of my capabilities. It's not something I've been practicing. I think it's the same way with this. You know, if you're not practicing your critical thinking skills, if you're not practicing your creativity, if you're not putting that into place, if you're deferring that to AI to do it on your behalf, it's not something you just pull off the shelf and come back and you're as sharp as you were. It's something you have to practice. So I do think AI is here. We have to use it. It's going to be implemented into our daily lives, especially our business lives. I think there are ways you can do it where you're still in the loop, you're still using your critical thinking skills. And I think the real power is it amplifies it and helps you be even better. Mm-hmm. But I think we have to be careful with our decision making, our creativity, that we're not giving our power away even unintentionally. And then we kind of lose that muscle. You know, we don't have the practice as much anymore. And humans aren't machines. We can't just click it on just like that and be where we were. Like it's not how we're wired, you know. So I do think that's something I'm not as terrified of it now, but I would say 10, 15 years ago, especially like kids growing up in this age, I do think we have to be very, very careful about how it's taking our creativity away from us and we're just deferring to it and we're not getting that practice ourselves.
Yeah,
I would say
definitely.
Wonderful, important takeaway.
Yeah, I hope in a few years we can still say that we have our creative muscle and we still use it. We still train it. But I think also with podcasts like this, also your voice, David, I think that's the important things that we need to push a little bit more so we talk about it and spread the word and don't just let this overrule everything.
Agreed.
Good. Oh my God, we learned a lot, Toby, right?
Yes.
Wow.
I love the jet. And now I want to go out for a beer, David. In 10 minutes somewhere. I don't know. What time is it at your end? I guess somewhere.
It's only 9 a.m. here in California, okay. So it's a little early for a beer. But I will take you up on that next time I'm in here.
Yeah, but thank you so much, David. Yeah. Last question. What is one or two key takeaways you would like to give to our listeners when it comes to creativity? What should they really take away after listening to that?
Give yourself like a time box. Say there's something you're working on. It's very uncertain. Give yourself 3 weeks. You know, give yourself 3 weeks and say, how would I learn the most I can about this in 3 weeks? Like tap in your creativity. What are the things? You're not going to have the ultimate proof in 3 weeks. But if there's something you're working on, you're really worried about it, how would I learn as much as I can about this? There's a good chance it's going to fall into one of those 3 circles: desirable, viable, feasible. It's probably going to be desirability or viability. So how can I learn? Even if it's just directional evidence, how much can I learn? And I think you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised at how much you can learn and how creative you can be applying that to de-risking what you're working on. So that's what I would recommend.
Great.
We'll do that now.
Thank you very much, David, for this great episode of our podcast. Looking forward to our beer.
I appreciate you. Thank you for the engaging questions. It was really fun hanging out with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.